Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Jürgen Liias. I am a Roman Catholic priest. I am a senior priest on the staff of St. Patrick's Parish in Stoneham, which is the neighboring community of Melrose, where we tape our show. Wellsprings of Faith looks at religious faith and the journey of faith in a person's life and the fruit of that faith in their work and ministry in the world for Jesus Christ. Today we actually welcome back a guest we had. We never quite completed our conversation last time. I have Ian Hewitt here, who's the president and chief counsel of the Mass Family Institute. His journey was so interesting that we never got to the work that he does as president and chief counsel of the Mass Family Institute. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Welcome back.
Thanks so much
for coming back.
Good to be back. Great to see you again.
It was great hearing your story. We're not going to go through that again. Maybe we'll air this in a way, although once that's up in YouTube world, you never know who will watch it. But nonetheless, maybe you could summarize your faith. I kind of remember it. You basically grew up without Christian faith and came to faith and then came to decide to dedicate your life's work as a lawyer to serving the faith. So maybe you could sum that up in your own words before we get to the work you do.
Well, if I could try to briefly sum it up, we kind of talked about last time, I didn't grow up with any particular religious beliefs, wasn't raised to be pro or anti-religious or to adhere to any particular religious views. But when I was a teenager, I was militantly anti-Christian. I had some experiences with Christians and Christianity that made me start to kind of reassess my perception of the Christian faith. And that led me to this period of searching that was this deep period of intellectual inquiry for me, which brought me to a place where I realized that I believed Christianity was true intellectually, and I wanted it to be at the center of my identity. And that's a really good segue, actually, into what we're talking about today, because that process of spiritual seeking that I went through, studying theology and philosophy, grappling with the nature of reality and with the destiny of humanity, searching and digging into all these questions really taught me to rediscover that I enjoyed learning. And that really played a big part of my going to law school. I'm not sure I would have gone to law school and become a lawyer had I not gone through that process. Because as I was digging into these deep existential and ultimate questions, I was kind of using those same intellectual tools to also apply myself in undergrad to my studies. And realizing that I actually liked learning and maybe I'd like to pursue some kind of graduate education. So that helped lead me to become a lawyer.
And of course, these deep questions. Number one, what is truth? Is there a truth? And is there something? And of course, what is justice? I mean, what is right and wrong in terms of certainly your legal work? And that is the journey of faith. I love John Paul II was probably the most articulate advocate of the relation between faith and reason. He wrote some encyclicals. It isn't like faith is somehow opposed to reason or below reason, or even in the long run above reason. Faith and reason are, he called it two wings on the flight of true Christian faith.
A funny thing about having a secular background and then becoming a Christian is you hear certain famous biblical quotes as secular idioms before you realize that they're biblical quotes. And I knew the Johnny Cash lyric, "The lonely voice of youth cries, what is truth?" before I knew that Pilate had asked Jesus what is truth.
Pilate cynically asked that of
That's right.
Jesus.
Pilate was covering Johnny Cash.
Well, let's, you've come recently now to be head of Mass Family Institute. First of all, just say what is Mass Family Institute, and then we can kind of talk about the work you're doing as head of that organization.
Mass Family Institute is Massachusetts' only full-time Christian advocacy organization. We do legal and local policy advocacy, so defending religious liberty, free speech, parental rights, other kinds of constitutional rights, and we also lobby, especially at the local level, municipal governments, school boards. We also work on helping religious institutions to build church-based community. So building homeschool co-ops, giving people the legal assistance and logistical assistance they need to build that kind of infrastructure and make their communities autonomous.
I mean, that seems to be one of the, at least my experience. I'm sort of 76 now, so I've been around a little while. The kind of creation of a Christian counterculture Whereas when I grew up, the culture was sort of breathed Christian values. Now the culture does not. And so the need really for creating alternative schools, alternative structures of political action to the secular kind of structures is somewhat, it's always been somewhat there, but it's been, wouldn't you say it's even more needed these days?
Yeah, absolutely. That's well put. I tell people often, MFI was founded in the early 90s, and it was working on fundamentally different kinds of things because it existed in a fundamentally different cultural context in the early 90s. And the way that a lot of Christians were engaged in political advocacy from the early 90s to the early to mid-aughts, they could sort of posture as the people who represented normal values and normal people. And that message just fundamentally wouldn't land now. Christians, like Orthodox Jews or like Muslims, are, especially in a place like Massachusetts, obviously a distinct religious minority, and they need to safeguard their rights and their interests in the same way that other successful, distinctive religious minorities have done so.
And so it is kind of ironic, but the reality that religious liberty, which is the first liberty in the Bill of Rights, somehow has really been challenged because of that. And it's something that most religious people took for granted. The air we breathe was a place of freedom of religion. One of the unique things about America and the strong value. Suddenly, religious people have to actually fight for their liberty.
That's right. Although I'm somewhat optimistic in this area, because as the challenges to religious liberty become more and more intense, there's more and more hostility to people with controversial minority religious beliefs. Our case law, certainly at the federal constitutional level, is getting stronger and stronger. Right. The case law on the Free Exercise Clause is much better now than certainly it was in the 90s. We have more robust protections under the federal Free Exercise Clause, and something every Christian or other religious person in Massachusetts should know, and a lot of people don't, is we actually have stronger protections for religious liberty under our Massachusetts state constitution than under the federal constitution.
Really?
That's right.
Flesh that out a little. What, like, for example?
Well, so a big part of this, and I don't know how much detail you want me to get into here, but in 1990, which is the year I was born, the U.S. Supreme Court issued this decision called Employment Division against Smith. And it's one of the most bizarre decisions in the entire history of the U.S. Supreme Court. And essentially what it said is, now, as people know, most rights in the Bill of Rights, like your right to free speech, if the government infringes on that right, even if a majority, say, voted to infringe on your free speech rights, you can go to court and get an injunction to protect your free speech rights. You don't have to go to Congress or go to your state legislature and say, will you please not censor me and silence me for my viewpoints. It doesn't matter if a majority wants to censor you. You have a remedy in the courts. Well, what the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1990 in the Employment Division case is, unlike all the other rights in the Bill of Rights, the Free Exercise Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which gives us religious liberty, is not enforceable in court. Your only way to vindicate your religious liberty rights is through the political process. You have to just go to your legislature and try to persuade them to give you greater religious liberty.
Yeah.
Since then, the U.S. Supreme Court has really dialed that back, and it's started to expand federal constitutional religious liberty rights more and more. So we are in a much better position now than we are in the 90s, but we're much better off in Massachusetts than in the federal courts because the Massachusetts Supreme Court, in interpreting our state constitution, has never taken that federal Employment Division v. Smith position. It's always said our state constitutional right to religious liberty is enforceable in state court.
And because I'm a supporter of and connected somewhat with MFI, I'm aware of some of the legal battles you've been engaging in and quite successful in a lot of. So share some of your victories in the public square over these last couple of years and some of the challenges in the forward in that matter of religious liberty.
Yeah, well, throughout last year, and this battle is continuing into this year in a new way, we saw municipal governments all around the state attempt to pass ordinances that would censor pregnancy resource centers. So these are typically broad ordinances that prohibit quote-unquote misleading speech usually, some vague statement like that, and they
Right.
subject PRCs to fines if they are quote-unquote misleading in the medical care they provide. Now, what's important to understand is what these people mean by misleading. When cultural progressives try to pass these ordinances to censor PRCs, what they're saying is you claim, PRC, that you're a healthcare provider, and yet you don't provide abortions, and so therefore you're misleading people by claiming to be a healthcare
I
provider.
know.
So you wouldn't have to actually mislead people to run afoul of one of these ordinances. They just don't like the religious and ethical beliefs of the PRCs, and they're trying to censor them and shut them down for that reason. And we waged a pretty successful town-by-town battle to defeat all of these anti-PRC ordinances and protect the free speech of PRCs, including in pretty left-wing towns, in Worcester and in East Hampton. Both those places, by the way, have really strong and successful PRCs. We went in, defended the free speech of PRCs, and threatened litigation until these municipal governments backed down and either vetoed these ordinances or just voted them down in a majority vote.
It really is sort of extraordinary, at least for me, the contradiction that, I mean, these are basically most often nonprofit organizations with an enormous ministry of people, free time, taking care of people with problem pregnancies and all the rest, as well as obviously offering professional medical services. But you would think that the pro-choice culture would affirm the reality of choice, that there are places that people who don't want an abortion have a place to go to be helped in the situation of a problem pregnancy. Yet the effort to malign and to shut down all these places has been rather fierce and, again,
Right.
sort of contradictory to a pro-choice philosophy.
Right. Well, it's escalating now to the state level. So the Massachusetts Department of Public Health in January issued a memo where they threatened to go after the medical licenses of healthcare providers who affiliate with pregnancy resource centers. So any healthcare provider watching this, or if anyone who is watching this and is affiliated with a PRC, knows any of these healthcare providers, encourage them to contact MFI and speak to me or to speak to Sam Whiting, and we want to make sure we're prepared to defend the constitutional rights
And
of
is
these
that
healthcare
is the
providers.
assault on what grounds? That they're misinformation, they're not doing proper health care because they don't provide abortion?
That's exactly
Is
right.
that the bottom line?
That's
concept?
exactly right. The basic argument is you PRCs have all the trappings of a healthcare center, but any legitimate healthcare center would provide abortions. You don't provide abortions, therefore you're a fake clinic
Now,
and not a legitimate.
is that
healthcare
actually true? For example, there are Catholic hospitals. Do they provide abortions?
I've never encountered a Catholic hospital that provides an abortion.
So wouldn't they also be held? Haven't they been challenged too, as well as doctors who, in their own conscience, won't provide it?
The reason I think they're particularly focused on PRCs, and they are focused for sure on going after just regular Catholic healthcare providers at Catholic hospitals, but I think a lot of the focus on PRCs is that if a woman comes into a pregnancy resource center, she's going to get all kinds of material assistance, but they're also going to try to convince her of their perspective on abortion. And so obviously people that want to censor these PRCs don't like that. They think you should only be able to speak as a healthcare provider in a pro-abortion way. And you're right to point out, it really underscores the totalitarian nature of contemporary cultural progressivism. The early kind of cynical rhetoric around this issue was, if you don't like abortions, don't have an abortion. And I think we can see that was never really sincere. None of these major progressive institutions really meant that, because now that they have unlimited abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy in Massachusetts and many other blue states, the next step for them is to censor all institutions that disagree with them, and that's what they're trying to do.
and then of course call it hate speech too, if it's not just medical misinformation.
That's right.
So that's an area. Obviously, the other area I know that you're really involved in is sort of the real what we call the transgender wars. This whole new mutation, I'd call it, in the dissolution of Christian sexual ethics, this sort of new mutation in the movement of gender dysphoria and all the rest is being embraced as perfectly normal and healthy and to be encouraged and supported.
Well, not just that, but if anyone dissents from it, they need to be silenced.
That's right.
Which
That's
is
where the
where
hate
all of the
speech-
litigation
right,
opportunities
right,
arise.
right, the silence.
And you're right that this is happening all over the country. I had, when I was head of litigation at Cornerstone in New Hampshire, I worked on a case where a student was athletically sanctioned for saying in a text message there are only two genders. And then after I brought that case, MFI brought a now ongoing case on behalf of Liam Morrison,
Yes.
who was actually suspended from school for wearing a T-shirt saying there are only two genders. And we are increasingly contacted by teachers who fear being censored or are threatened with censorship or with termination. Or discipline for expressing their views on gender. So it's an area where, because of the totalitarian nature of cultural progressivism, they really can't help themselves. They will automatically resort to censorship if people speak in a dissenting way on this issue in any kind of place where cultural progressives have power, which is most places.
I mean, I don't know how analyzing sort of the psychology of the progressive movement, that which becomes sort of this movement that engages in supporting freedom, human freedom, is the language, and yet creates. The end result is it's sort of like, you know, Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, you know, the sign over Auschwitz, work makes you free, as you put people into these totalitarian institutions. This kind of paradox, again, or contradiction of freedom that is actually totalitarian and not freedom at all.
Right. Well, I'm excited for us to reach the point when conservatives will stop reacting to this sort of thing by saying, you know, quote unquote, so much for the tolerant left. I hear that far too often because I think major cultural progressive institutions are really not even pretending to be tolerant. They don't really speak about tolerance. They speak exclusively about their conception of justice. And what their conception of justice entails is that people, of course, in a quote-unquote just society would not think or speak in an unjust way, which is any way that deviates from cultural progressive orthodoxy.
Right.
And I think we'll just be reaching a more honest point in the conversation, hopefully in the near future, where everyone kind of recognizes that it's part of the essence of contemporary cultural progressivism to be totalitarian.
It goes back to sort of what I said at the beginning of the show, a completely different idea of justice. I remember having a conversation many years ago with a woman priest in the Episcopal Church. I used to be an Episcopal priest, and you know, again, they were talking constantly about justice, and I said, you know, the problem is your idea of justice is not my idea of justice. Your idea of justice is that you can kill unborn babies. My idea of justice is that you preserve life and the sanctity of life in the unborn child. So it's just a completely different vision of what really is justice.
It's always important to start, I think, with clarification about those initial premises in the conversation, because so often we're starting from completely different premises, but we talk past each other without even really identifying them.
And figure out. So what's been exciting for you so far as head of this new organization? I'm not new for you, but a new position moving from New Hampshire to Massachusetts.
Well, one thing that's exciting is I was overly pessimistic coming from New Hampshire to Massachusetts. Now, let me be clear, the state legislature in Massachusetts, in the vast majority of situations, it would be a waste of time to try to go there and protect constitutional rights. The primary subset of situations where we would want to do that would be if we were planning to litigate against the state. If the state was going to pass a censorship bill, for example, we'd probably show up and warn them, you know, hey, if you guys pass this, we're going to sue you guys, and you're going to have to spend a lot of money litigating against us. But it wouldn't be worth our time to go and try to kind of persuade them on just policy grounds. Right. Yeah. I mean, even in the Senate, a lot of the Republicans are just sort of unanimously culturally progressive. But at the local level, I didn't realize how much reason for optimism there was in Massachusetts. There are a lot of victories that can be won at the school board and at the municipal level in Massachusetts, and I would say in some sense there are more victories to be won at the local level than there were in New Hampshire. Because when I was in New Hampshire, because it's such a purple competitive state, a lot of, especially on the left, national organizations massively invest in building a robust infrastructure there. And I'll just give one example. GLSEN, which is a national organization, gay, lesbian, and straight education network, I believe, they craft model policies for school districts. And one of their policies provides for secret transitioning of students, and not only secret transitioning of students, but deliberately lying to parents to conceal that transitioning. Wow. If a parent asks, is this going on, the policy dictates the school must not just say, I can't answer that question, but actually lie to conceal the transitioning. That policy is passed in, to my knowledge, every single school district in all of New Hampshire. It has not passed in every single school district in Massachusetts because there's just a stronger infrastructure promoting that kind of authoritarian policy in New Hampshire at the local level than there is in Massachusetts. Again, maybe some of that is Massachusetts cultural progressives have such monolithic control, they don't feel a need to invest that much in Massachusetts.
Now, is that, like, for example, in New Hampshire, has that been challenged? Can that be challenged legally?
It is being challenged legally.
So again, that kind of totalitarian overreach into separation of really tearing away, again, under the aegis of justice. These are sort of misunderstood, sad children, and their parents aren't sympathetic to them and are therefore abusing them because they're not being sympathetic to them. And,
that is the argument, that if you tell parents about this, or more specifically, if you don't lie to parents about this, the parents will abuse their children.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is in every other legal context, you can be deprived of some of your parental rights without having a criminal conviction. We don't require a criminal conviction. But any other context I can think of, you need at least some modicum of evidence that the parents are engaged in abuse, or even that they at least may abuse their children. And what these policies do is they just presume by default that all parents are guilty automatically, even if there's no evidence that there's any problem with any individual parents. And they, more importantly, they don't just presume the worst of parents, they presume the best of the state. The state is presumed to always know what is best for any individual child.
And of course, that's the ultimate totalitarian fantasy, of course, and illusion. And as we've seen, I mean, the 20th century just exposed in the totalitarian horrors of Soviet communism and Nazi Germany and their ilk, how, you know, the idea of the government knows best is actually a profound evil.
One of my favorite philosophers, the French philosopher Simone Weil, said that the state will naturally try to constrict and suffocate all organic spheres of life, the community, the family, the church, because these things attract love. And the state, by its nature, desires to kill anything else that people love naturally so that they are forced to love the state. And that's fundamentally how totalitarianism works.
So you're optimistic as you fight these battles in Massachusetts. What are some of the more recent cases you've had to deal with? Some of the new I don't know. Sometimes you know, these mutations, I call them kind of moral mutations. Is sort of I think it was Moynihan many years ago defining deviancy down. It seems less any kind of sanity and moral judgments about, but these things become acceptable and embraced and even promulgated publicly. So what's some of the newer challenges we are not looking forward to, but need to be ready for?
Well, we're counsel for a detransitioner in a medical injury case. This is a brand new developing area of law. We're seeing more and more detransitioners come out of the woodwork who regret transitioning and think they were transitioned too hastily through this, you know, thoughtless automatic process. That's going to become a major issue just inevitably when you look at the numbers of these people. Right. More and more free speech cases. We're being contacted by more and more teachers who are concerned about being censored. That, by the way, I really want to emphasize is one of the best ways to challenge bias in the public school system. I get so many questions, and this happened to me in New Hampshire as well, happens to me here in Massachusetts, from especially parents who say, my school is so biased in their teaching, can you please sue or do some lawyer thing to stop them from being so biased? And I always have to explain, it's called government speech. The government gets to express the government's opinions, and elections have consequences. You have no constitutional right for your child to have an unbiased education. But you don't have a right to an unbiased education. You don't have a right to stop your child from being indoctrinated, but you do have a right to protect your child from censorship and discrimination by the state. So if a child speaks up in school and expresses dissenting views and is censored or sanctioned in some way, if they form a student club and the club is shut down, if a teacher speaks out and is censored or sanctioned, or if someone even tries to become a teacher and faces censorship or discrimination because of their views, we may have a great case. The problem is we don't have nearly enough people who have the courage to step up and express their
exactly.
views.
That's what I was going to say. That really is, in a way, the challenge to those of us with our religious convictions is to be bold enough and courageous enough to express them.
That's right.
And to live them out. It can't be just a little private thing where we're safe and maintain our safety. We have to have courage, which seems to me is the essence, and certainly of Christianity from Jesus Christ on through his disciples. They were an illegal. Jesus died, for being, quote, illegal, and all the apostles, with the exception of John, died as martyrs for being illegal. But they had the courage they didn't silence themselves. They were faithful and articulate.
That's exactly right. So many of our legal problems are fundamentally cultural problems in the church. Because I've had this conversation so many times where a parent will say, the teaching is so biased, can you please sue or take some legal action to stop it from being biased? And I'll say, I can't sue because the teaching is biased, but if you encourage your child to speak up, start a student organization, express their opinions in a class assignment, and they're censored, we're going to have a great case, and we can combat bias that way. And 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, the parent will say, oh, well, no, my kid's not going to speak up. They're not that. They want to keep their head down and not express their opinions, and I have to explain, well, you're surrendering your constitutional rights then. And fundamentally, that's a problem in the church. That's a problem of the church not sufficiently valuing boldness as a cultural value, whereas the cultural left obviously tremendously values boldness and taking dominion over every area of life. If the church had even a modicum of that energy and missional zeal, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today.
I mean, frankly, the church within itself is often very, very cowardly. I've been a Catholic long enough now to notice that some places, where I've been instructed, don't speak about abortion, or anything from the pulpit, or any of these matters. No, we don't want to have any controversy. Well, that's it's even cowardly, and that from the pulpit. And if you can't speak the truth in your preaching ministry, then you're already locked into and unconsciously a servant for the enemy. And
that's an especially big problem because we need clergy and church leaders and lay leaders in the church to be the ones encouraging Christians and members of their congregation to be bold.
Bold, and yes, and to, but just as you said, begin to participate in local politics and say, no, you need to be a change agent and to engage in this thing, not to be just a passive victim complaining.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so. Well, look, we're out of time, and I want to welcome you again, first of all, to Massachusetts and to the leadership of MFI. It really is, I've been part of MFI since its very earliest beginnings. I think it was called the Pilgrim Institute or something like that many years ago.
Yeah.
And to see its fidelity and steadfastness, and it's in an increasingly hostile thing. So you are brave warriors, and may the Lord pour out his power upon you and his protection for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, God. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We're going to post the website for MFI so that you can connect with them. It's one of the premier faith organizations fighting the battle for Christian faith, Christian truth, Christian understanding of justice. And hope you'll, if you don't know about it, I hope you'll connect with it and support it and also use it if you are the kind of situations that Ian's talked about in your own family life and school life and business life, wherever you feel your faith is being, your religious liberty is being violated. And if it's not being violated, then talk out, then maybe you'll experience the persecution that will stir up fidelity for God's sake. And may the Lord bless you now and always.